Anyway, how about the chapter itself? That was quite the breakdown Ginger was having at the beginning of this chapter. Well, I did. As exaggerated as that sounds, it happened. Pretty much exactly as written. I don't believe there was any embellishment or removal of details. I still remember that day. Well, possibly because I documented it, cementing it in my brain. But it happened to me. However, that's one of the joys of writing a novel. You can shove a shitty day onto a fictional character. You let them deal with it, in the meantime recontextualizing it in your own head. It happens a few times here and there throughout the book. Not quite to this extreme, though.
This old song and dance again.
Such moments happen.
You don't talk personal shit.
I haven't fought with any giant
What's
sharks
your
in the
new
sky.
word? Cancelled?
Let's move
I'm
on.
cancelling you from this bullshit.
That again. And just in case you're wondering, all text was written by me, Daniel's Nemesis, and XBook is purely a work of fiction and is not meant to be based on anyone or any events at all. The music was also by me, Daniel's Nemesis, as was the image for the complete this podcast. It sucks, doesn't it? But there we go. It's not
This is frustrating. I've been completely eliminated from my own podcast. I've tried re-recording stuff, but I can't insert my own voice anymore. Yes, I associate it with terrible, spammy YouTube videos, but text-to-speech seems my only option. Where are we story structure-wise? Looking at both Blake Snyder and John Truby, I think that it's fairly clear that I've accelerated through a few main story points, if not completely blending them together into a superbeat. Superbeat was supposed to be in inverted commas, and I don't know if my voice can carry that sarcasm. Is there a plugin for the editing software that I'm using? Well, let's quickly go over William. What is his midpoint? Probably when he goes to Earth. This is when he's at his most optimistic, what many story analyzers call the false high. A midpoint can either be a low point or a high point, either way it should be a false extreme. On a personal level, he's achieved his simple goal of completing the journey, even if it's temporary. He got to Earth, and for a few short moments, it's his and his alone. Plus a cow. Of course, to complete his goal truly, he needs to get the whole of his race onto Earth. From here, he probably fits more the John Truby mold, in that he has gone through the drive moment. He finally agrees to the large-scale invasion that many of those around him clearly want. To briefly summarize the drive, it's a series of actions that our protagonist does to win against the antagonist. In William's story, Ginger, representing the humans, is the antagonist. These actions can become desperate and immoral as the antagonist is too strong. Now, I wouldn't say that Ginger is too strong here, he's certainly stronger than was anticipated as he's stopped the first attack. But the way that William, reacts to this is to suggest that Earth is full of superhumans, or Avengers and Justice Leagues combined, and his next attack on Earth is vastly stronger. Such a large attack fleet is obviously desperate, as the first invasion would have been sufficient were it not for one bizarre moment in which Ginger accidentally managed to crash one of the Trascan fighter crafts. Then in the previous chapter, we saw William move into John Truby's next step. Attack by ally. To say that Skanai hasn't been eye to eye on a number of issues with William is an understatement. Whatever the relationship between these two is, and a number of different types of relationship have been hinted at, Scifi is viewed by William as his key confidant, therefore his key ally. But Scifi has been pushing his own agenda, and is slowly winning by getting William to submit to his plan. Now, John Truby says that attack by ally is when said person confronts the protagonist due to their increasingly immoral acts. The ally is an avatar of the protagonist's conscience, and so the attack is actually an appeal to the conscience of the hero. An intervention, if you will. The Anatomy of Story was published in 2008, approximately 2 years after I last made any revision to XBook, and 2 years after I graduated from my script writing masters. So forgive me for preemptively misinterpreting this step. Scifi's attack is to undermine William. He is not alone, Dreamscapes is dragged in, but Scifi is very apparent in his mocking of William. And in fact, William has already, of his own accord, dug into his conscience as he envisions a violent invasion with killings done for the pure sake of them rather than for any need. Whatever the route that was taken, William has begun questioning whether his choices were right or not. And he is seen as weak for doing so. But at least he can capture Ginger, right? Where is Ginger, story-wise? Well, let's look at our groovy cat Blake Snyder. Blake Snyder defines the midpoint as where stories A plus B cross. So, he's had his fun and games in his new toy, and he's won. He's at a high, very confident. Then the base is attacked by William. Ginger shoos them off. Still a winner. So, let's consider that as the midpoint as the fun and games crashes to a halt. Ginger has a job to do, and he has the toy to do it in. Flying into space, he goes through a couple of save the cat steps. Bad guys close in is the step that immediately follows the midpoint. William's little attack was merely a teaser. On the radar, Ginger can see the vast number of new fighter craft flying towards him, and then onto Earth. Can't get any more literal than that. We then push onto the all is lost step. This mirrors the midpoint and is a false defeat. Well, the midpoint was winning against the first invasion. So, how do we mirror that? Being unable to act against the next attack. For Ginger, that's a defeat. Even if he chose to turn the craft around, he can't as he's locked in by a tractor beam. Do we still use that term anymore? I feel like I haven't heard it since the 90s. And then we come to this chapter and the next beat. The dark night of the soul. This is the existential moment. The why is it all happening moment. Or as Ginger says, why me? As stated, I have blended various steps together. Ginger has been existential over the last couple of his chapters. But in this chapter, he really does realize that he can die. I've only touched on 2 theories here. I'll leave it to you to match Ginger's story with John Truby, or Williams with Blake Snyder. Your analysis will be just as relevant. That's where we currently are. The psychologist's chair. The house makes a reappearance. It's not usual in this book for things to move across from one chapter to the next. I appear to have developed that little-known concept as continuity. I mean, in terms of convenient devices and imagination, MacGyver and James Bond never had a childhood home to hand. We don't know much of Ginger's childhood nor of his home. It first appears in Fly, Ginger. Fly. And in the very first actual chapter, Ginger makes reference to growing up in a town 5 miles away. We only know that it's Ginger's childhood home as he describes it as the house that he spent most of his life in. He deems it important enough to pick up without ever giving any reason for doing so, and it is then immediately forgotten for the majority of Fly, Ginger. Fly. But it reappears here. So, we can only infer from the scant details given. It is a place of safety, in fact, it's a place of defense. Ginger uses it as escape, to get away from the external terrors of being shot at by aliens. It's not stated that the aliens do not penetrate it, but as soon as Ginger picks up the house,
after running through, his troubles begin again. He is aware that as soon as he picks it up, he is exposed. And that's all we have. But in terms of associations, it gives us a teaser of what his childhood must have been like. Except, he doesn't just refer to his house as safety, he also refers to it as light. Here, I'm pretty certain that means luminescence, as opposed to being easy to carry around, despite the fact that he actually does. So, his childhood home is not only a fort. It can be, and may previously have been, used as a fort. But this is clearly not the house's only function. Unfortunately, there are no other clues. So, time to move on again. Ginger clearly needs sidekicks. Holly is an apparent one that keeps popping up. Dee is a representation of who he does everything for. And now we have a breeze. One that is temperamental. First, it soothes and heals him. It then turns evil as the Trascan security team appears. It's fairly obvious that he's in an air vent. I've never been in an air vent, myself, but I do imagine winds traveling through. Please let me know if I'm wrong. Assuming there is a flow of air in such places, it's a clear sign of Ginger's fear and desperation that he anthropomorphizes even a gust of wind to not feel completely isolated. An ally is a core thing in a story. After all, how do we know how somebody feels without having someone to tell? Alright, I'm deliberately downplaying a lot of great stories that are able to show and not tell, but you get my point. Vocalizing feelings can be a big part of showing. I've kind of circumnavigated this by going into first-person narration, and present-tense narration at that. Narration implies that someone is listening or reading. That someone has a story and they are telling that story to another person. Present-tense first-person narration doesn't get used much, because if things are happening right then to a character, who are they telling their story to? It's fourth wall breaking, and as much as I personally felt it would bring the reader further in, experiencing the action as the character does, much like in a movie, I know that many people disagree and think it's an awkward narration device. The characters are too self-aware, perhaps of being in their own story and work of fiction. However, with my two characters being so solo throughout this book, this technique at least allows both characters to vocalize themselves, and therefore to process, and digest, and act on what's happening around them. In fact, there's a military strategy, the OODA loop, that military agents try to break in there. Enemies. OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, act. And this is something that we see Ginger doing in his own surreal ways. Granted, we see this in many stories. Other characters at least get to discuss this with their allies. But I go through the loop with Ginger and William alone. For Ginger, definitely, the first-person present-tense narration is his true sidekick. We, the audience, are his allies. He vocalizes internally to process and act on his decisions. Without us observing, would he be able to do that? And on that Scrodinger's cat bombshell, I shall finish here. What do we have to look forward to next time? In another act of continuity, we learn one of this chapter's guard's name.
Until next time, TTFN.